The Little Book of Behavioral Investing, How Not to Be Your Own Worst Enemy by James Montier. Picture this. You've been grinding away at your job for 20 solid years. Day in, day out, you show up, put in the work, do everything you're supposed to do. Then one day, you sit down and crunch the numbers. You compare what you actually earned to what you could have made. And your stomach drops. You've left more than 75% of your potential earnings just sitting there on the table. Not because the economy tanked, not because of some stock market meltdown, simply because of the small, everyday choices you made along the way. Devastating, right? Well, here's the kicker. That's the exact story of the average investor over the past few decades. There's this famous annual study called the Dalbar study that tracks this very thing. It stacks up the returns of the stock market, say the S&P 500, against what real people actually earn with their own money. Over one recent 20-year stretch, the market itself returned just over 8% per year, but the average person investing in that same market, they scraped together a measly 1.9% per year. How is that even possible? How can someone be in exactly the right place, at exactly the right time, and still walk away with almost nothing? The answer is the most important and trickiest lesson in all of finance. And it's exactly why we're here today, diving into this brilliant little book by James Montier called The Little Book of Behavioral Investing. This isn't your typical stock-picking manual. You won't find complex formulas or crystal ball economic forecasts here. This book is about you. It's about that invisible enemy living inside your own head, the one that tricks you into buying high, selling low, and basically sabotaging your financial future. The legendary father of value investing, Ben Graham, once said something that cuts right to the heart of it. The investor's chief problem, and even his worst enemy, is likely to be himself. By the time we're done here today, you'll understand exactly who that enemy is. You'll see those invisible strings pulling at your decisions, those emotional traps and mental shortcuts hardwired into your brain. And most importantly, you'll learn the simple, powerful strategies that the world's greatest investors use, not to outsmart the market, but to outsmart themselves. This isn't just about money. It's about mastering the psychology of decision-making, a skill that'll serve you for the rest of your life. So let's dive into the most challenging and rewarding territory of all, your own mind. To understand why we make such disastrous mistakes with our money, we need to hop in a time machine, way back. About 150,000 years ago, to the African savanna. Our brains, you see, were forged in an environment of split-second, life-or-death decisions. Is that rustling in the grass a lion waiting to pounce, or just the wind? Is that fruit going to kill me or keep me alive? Our brains evolved to be incredibly efficient survival machines. They developed mental shortcuts, emotional triggers, and gut reactions that let us make instant decisions. The difference between dodging a lion and chasing an antelope was literally survival. There was zero time for slow, careful deliberation. The problem? We've taken that same brain, a brain perfectly designed for the savannah, and dropped it into the middle of the modern financial world. And those survival instincts that kept us alive for millennia are the very things that make us terrible investors. James Montier gives us a wonderful way to think about this. He suggests we imagine two different systems operating inside our minds at all times. For anyone who's a Star Trek fan, this'll make perfect sense. Inside your head, you've got a Dr. McCoy and a Mr. Spock. Dr. McCoy was the emotional heart of the crew, passionate, impulsive, ruled by his feelings. This is what Montier calls the X system. It's the automatic, effortless gut reaction part of our brain. All information hits this system first. It's quick, it's messy, and it deals in things like familiarity and feelings. It doesn't need proof. It just needs to feel right. Then there's Mr. Spock. Half human, half Vulcan, Spock was the master of logic. He suppressed his emotions and made decisions based on reason and evidence. This is the C system. It's the deliberate, slow, logical part of our brain. Engaging the C system takes real effort. It processes information one step at a time and requires actual proof and logic to believe something's true. Now, we all like to think we're Spock, don't we? We believe our decisions are driven by logic and careful thought. But the reality is, Dr. McCoy is running the show way more often than we'd like to admit. That flash of anger when you stub your toe on a chair, cursing at an inanimate object? That's Dr. McCoy. That urge to buy a stock because everyone's talking about it and it feels exciting? That's Dr. McCoy, too. Neuroscientists have found that the emotional parts of our brain, the X system, are evolutionarily much older than the logical parts. Emotion is designed to trump logic for a very simple reason: survival. Imagine a large snake in a glass box placed in front of you. If the snake suddenly rears up, you'll jump back instinctively. You won't have time to think, "Oh, there's a pane of glass between us, I'm perfectly safe." Your X system sees a threat and reacts instantly to keep you safe. The signal for you to jump back travels on a low road, straight to the brain's fear center. Only later does the signal take the high road to your C system, which calmly assesses the situation and realizes there's no real danger. By then, you've already jumped. From a survival standpoint, a false positive, jumping when there's no danger, is far better than a false negative, not jumping when there is. And so, our brains are wired for emotion to win. The question is, how good are you at letting Spock take control? A psychologist named Shane Frederick designed a simple 3-question test called the Cognitive Reflection Task. That's remarkably powerful at measuring this ability. Let's try it. First question. A bat and a ball together cost $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than the ball. How much does the ball cost? Your gut, your Dr. McCoy, probably screamed 10 cents. It's such an obvious answer. But it's wrong. If the ball was 10 cents, and the bat was $1 more, the bat would be $1.10, and the total would be $1.20. The correct answer, if you let Spock do the math for a moment, is that the ball costs 5 cents, and the bat costs $1.05. Second question. If it takes 5 machines 5 minutes to make 5 widgets, how long would it take 100 machines to make 100 widgets? Again, McCoy's gut reaction is probably 100 minutes. But Spock tells us that if 5 machines make 5 widgets in 5 minutes, then each machine makes 1 widget in 5 minutes. Therefore, 100 machines would make 100 widgets in just 5 minutes. And the last one. In a lake, there's a patch of lily pads. Every day, the patch doubles in size. If it takes 48 days for the patch to cover the entire lake, how long would it take for the patch to cover half of the lake? The intuitive answer is to halve the time and say 24 days. But if the patch is doubling in size every day, then on the day before it covers the entire lake, it must have covered half the lake. The correct answer is 47 days. If you got some of those wrong, don't worry, you're in very good company. When nearly 500 people took this test, only 17% got all 3 right. A full third of them got none right. Even among students at MIT, one of the world's top universities, less than half got all 3 correct. This test tells us something profound. We're all prone to making decisions with our emotional, impulsive X system, and we often fail to double-check those decisions with our logical C system. And here's the crucial link to investing. The situations where we're most likely to rely on our flawed McCoy brain are when a problem is complex, when information is incomplete, when goals are shifting, and when stress is high. Sound like investing to you? It should. It perfectly describes the environment we face in the financial markets. This is why the legendary investor Warren Buffett has said that what you need in investing isn't a stratospheric IQ, but the right temperament. You need the ability to control the urges that get other people into trouble. You need to learn how to let Spock take the helm. But here's the tricky part. Willpower, the very thing we rely on to control our urges, is like a muscle. It gets tired. Psychologists conducted a famous experiment to prove this. They brought in hungry students who'd been told not to eat for hours. One group was put in a room filled with the aroma of freshly baked chocolate chip cookies. On the table were two trays, one piled high with those warm cookies, the other with radishes. This group was told they could eat as many radishes as they wanted, but they were absolutely forbidden from touching the cookies. Can you imagine the willpower it took to sit there, smelling chocolate, while crunching on a radish? A second group was allowed to eat the cookies. A third group was in an empty room. Afterwards, all three groups were given a difficult, unsolvable puzzle to work on. The results were astounding. The group that had been forced to resist the cookies, the radish eaters, gave up on the puzzle in less than half the time of the other two groups. Their willpower had been completely drained by the simple act of resisting temptation. This tells us that relying on willpower alone to be a good investor is a losing strategy. Resisting the temptation to sell in a panic or buy into a hot trend might drain your self-control, leaving you vulnerable to making a bad decision later. So if we can't rely on willpower, what can we do? The answer, as we'll see, is not to try harder but to build a better system. The great investors haven't eliminated their emotions. They're just as human as we are. What they've done is build an investment process that protects them from their own worst instincts. They build a fortress of logic and discipline to keep Dr. McCoy from wrecking the ship. And the first bastion of that fortress is learning to deal with the heat of the moment. One of the biggest flaws in our thinking is something called an empathy gap. It's our profound inability to predict how we'll behave in a future emotional state. When you're calm and rational, you might believe that if the market were to fall 30%, you'd calmly see it as a buying opportunity. But when the day actually comes, and you're watching your life savings evaporate, your Dr. McCoy brain is screaming in terror, and all that calm logic goes out the window. You can see this everywhere in life. When you've just finished a huge meal, you can't imagine ever feeling hungry again. But if you go grocery shopping while you're starving, you'll buy everything in sight. So how do we bridge this empathy gap? How do we make good decisions today that'll protect us from our emotional selves tomorrow? The answer is one of the most powerful concepts in behavioral investing: pre-commitment. We have to prepare our plans and commit to them while we're in a cold, rational, Spock-like state. The legendary investor, Sir John Templeton, was a master of this. His famous motto was, "The time of maximum pessimism is the best time to buy, and the time of maximum optimism is the best time to sell." It's easy to agree with that, in theory, but it's incredibly difficult to buy when everyone around you is panicking and selling. So what did Templeton do? He didn't rely on his future bravery. He pre-committed. He always kept a wish list of great companies that he felt were well run but currently too expensive. He would then place standing orders with his brokers, what are called lowball or stink bids, to buy those stocks at prices that were 30, 40, or even 50% below their current market value. He made his buy decision when he was calm and rational. Then, when a market crash inevitably came and dragged those great companies down to bargain prices, his orders would automatically execute. He removed his future, emotional self from the equation. He knew that on the day the market was in freefall, he wouldn't feel like buying. So he built a system that would do it for him. This is the power of a process. It's a simple but profound way to let Spock make the decisions, long before McCoy even wakes up. This becomes even more critical when we talk about the most powerful emotion that drives bad investment decisions: fear. Let's play a little game. I give you $20 to start. The game will last 20 rounds. In each round, you can choose to invest $1. If you invest, we flip a coin. If it comes up heads, you win $2.50. If it comes up tails, you lose your dollar. Now, Spock would analyze this game and see it's a fantastic deal. You are risking $1 to win $2.50. The odds are heavily in your favor. The rational strategy is to play every single round. But what do real people do? Psychologists ran this exact experiment with a few different groups. One group was normal people, like you and me. Another group was truly unique. They had a very specific type of brain damage that made them incapable of feeling fear. Who do you think did better? It wasn't even close. The group that couldn't feel fear invested in 84% of the rounds and made the most money. The normal group? They only invested in 58% of the rounds. And here's the most telling part. After a round where they lost money, their fear took over. The pain of losing that single dollar was so intense that they invested less than 40% of the time in the next round. They let their emotions cause them to pass up a great opportunity right after a loss. Even worse, the longer the game went on, the worse their decision-making became. Fear was cumulative. This is a perfect model for a bear market. When stock prices are falling and valuations are cheap, that's precisely the time when future returns are likely to be highest. It's the equivalent of that coin flip game, but it's also the time when our fear is at its peak, especially if we've already lost money. Our Dr. McCoy brain screams, "Danger!" and we run for the exits, selling at the bottom. Or we suffer from what investor Jeremy Grantham calls terminal paralysis, sitting on our cash, too terrified to act. Grantham says there's only one cure for this paralysis. You absolutely must have a battle plan for reinvestment and stick to it. You have to decide now, while you're calm, what it'll take for you to get back into the market. Maybe it's a certain valuation level or a certain percentage decline, but you must define it, write it down, and commit to it. Because, as he warns, the market doesn't turn when it sees the light at the end of the tunnel. It turns when everything looks black, but just a subtle shade less black than the day before. By the time the good news is obvious, the biggest gains will already be gone. Fear isn't the only emotion that gets us into trouble. Its partner in crime is optimism, or more accurately, over-optimism. Let me ask you a few quick questions. Are you an above-average driver? How about your job? Are you better than most of your peers? Most of us, if we're being honest with ourselves, would answer yes to both. When the author asked a group of over 600 professional fund managers if they were above average at their jobs, a staggering 74% said they were. Of course, by definition, only half of them can be. This tendency to overrate our own abilities is known as over-optimism, and it's amplified by something called the illusion of control. We tend to believe we can influence outcomes that are actually random. This is why people will pay 4 times more for a lottery ticket if they get to pick their own numbers, as if the act of choosing somehow makes those numbers more likely to come up. In investing, this is incredibly dangerous. We feel that because we have access to tons of information, because we can choose from thousands of stocks, and because we're personally involved, we have some control over the outcome. This leads to the second major ego trap, overconfidence. One of the most robust findings in psychology is that experts are often even more overconfident than laypeople. The book shares a fascinating comparison between two groups of experts, weathermen and doctors. When a weatherman says there's a 50% chance of rain, it rains about 50% of the time. They're surprisingly well calibrated. Why? Because they get immediate, clear feedback every single day. They can look out the window and see if they were right or wrong. Doctors, on the other hand, are a terrifying bunch. Studies show that when doctors are 90% confident in a diagnosis, they're actually correct only about 15% of the time. The feedback they get is often delayed or ambiguous, so their overconfidence never gets corrected. Unfortunately, the evidence suggests that investment professionals are the one group that makes doctors look well calibrated. In one study, professional investors were asked to pick which stock in a pair would outperform over the next month. When they were 100% confident in their pick, absolutely no doubt in their minds, they were actually right less than 12% of the time. What happens when this massive overconfidence meets the stock market? Excessive trading. We think we know more than everyone else, so we buy and we sell constantly. Two professors, Terry Odian and Brad Barber, studied the accounts of 66,000 investors at a discount brokerage. They found that the individuals who traded the most frequently earned the lowest returns, lagging the market by a huge margin. Their supposed informational edge was completely eaten up by trading costs. And here's a fun, if slightly painful fact. They also found that men, who are psychologically more prone to overconfidence, traded far more than women, and as a result, women earned higher net returns. Even worse, men who needed their wives' permission to trade outperformed the single guys. It seems men are not only bad traders, but a bad influence as well. This overconfidence leads us directly to one of the most pointless and destructive activities in all of finance: forecasting. The entire investment industry seems obsessed with predicting the future. We build complex spreadsheets to forecast a company's earnings. We listen to economists predict the path of interest rates, and we watch talking heads on TV predict where the market's headed next. But the evidence is overwhelming. We're terrible at it. The consensus of economists has failed to predict every single one of the last 4 recessions. Financial analysts are, on average, wrong about a company's earnings by a staggering 94% when they first make a forecast 2 years out. Even with just 12 months to go, they're still off by 45%. They have absolutely no clue. So why do we keep doing it? In part, it's because we demand it. We crave certainty in an uncertain world. But it's also because the experts themselves have a whole toolkit of excuses that allow them to avoid admitting they can't forecast. When they get it wrong, they say things like, "If only the Fed hadn't cut rates, I would have been right," or "It just hasn't happened yet," or my personal favorite, "Something unexpected happened that was outside my model." The deeper reason we listen to forecasts, even when we know they're useless, is a powerful psychological bias called anchoring. When we're given a number, any number, our minds tend to cling to it, even if it's completely irrelevant. In one experiment, fund managers were asked to write down the last 4 digits of their phone number. Then they were asked to estimate the number of doctors in London. Those with high phone numbers, like 7,000 or above, gave an average estimate of 8,000 doctors. Those with low phone numbers, below 3,000, gave an average estimate of 4,000. Their phone number, a totally random piece of information, had anchored their guess. When an analyst puts a price target on a stock, even if it's a complete guess, that number anchors our thinking about the stock's value. It gives us a false sense of precision in a world that's fundamentally uncertain. So if forecasting is a fool's errand, how should we invest? The answer, as Ben Graham taught us, is that analysis should be penetrating, not prophetic. Our job isn't to guess the future, it's to understand the present value of a business. One powerful technique is to turn the forecasting process on its head. Instead of trying to forecast a company's future growth to arrive at a value, take the company's current stock price and work backward. Ask, what growth rate is the market implying with this price? Then you can compare that implied growth rate to the history of what companies have actually been able to achieve. For example, in early 2008, the stock prices of companies like Google and Apple were implying that they'd grow at 40% per year, every year, for the next 10 years. A quick look at history would tell you that almost no company, ever, has achieved that. The very best of the best only managed to grow at around 22%. The market was pricing in a future that was not just optimistic, but borderline impossible. And sure enough, those stocks fell dramatically later that year. This approach uses the power of historical facts to check the stories the market is telling itself. And that brings us to the next set of mental traps: the way our brains process information. Our first problem is that we think more information is always better. But psychological studies show this is a dangerous illusion. In a classic study, 8 experienced horse racing bookmakers were given information about past races and asked to predict the winners. They were given the information in chunks. First, the 5 most important variables, then 10, then 20, then 40. What happened was fascinating. Their accuracy as predictors flatlined after the first 5 pieces of information. The extra 35 data points did absolutely nothing to improve their predictions. They were just as accurate with 5 items as they were with 40. But their confidence in their predictions soared. The more information they had, the more certain they felt, even though they weren't getting any better. This is the illusion of knowledge. More information doesn't necessarily lead to better decisions, but it almost always leads to more overconfidence. We spend our time obsessing over trivial details and lose sight of the big picture. A far better approach comes from the emergency room. At a hospital in Michigan, doctors were sending 90% of patients with chest pains to the cardiac ICU, which was becoming overcrowded and expensive. The problem was, they were no better than a coin flip at determining who actually needed to be there. They were focusing on the wrong things, general risk factors like age and family history, rather than specific diagnostic cues. So researchers came up with a simple checklist, a series of yes-no questions, based on the few variables that actually had predictive power. The results were dramatic. The checklist helped the doctors dramatically improve their accuracy. The power of this approach is that it forces us to distinguish the signal from the noise. It forces us to focus only on what truly matters. As investors, we'd be far better off identifying the 3 to 5 things that are absolutely critical to an investment thesis, rather than trying to know everything about everything. As the great investor Jean-Marie Eviard said, "I see my job primarily as asking the right questions and focusing the analysis in order to make a decision." But it's not just about how much information we have, it's also about how we look at it. And here we encounter one of the most powerful and insidious biases of all, confirmatory bias. We don't look at evidence with an open mind. We actively seek out information that confirms what we already believe, and we ignore or dismiss anything that contradicts it. Let's try a little puzzle. I lay 4 cards on the table in front of you. They show E, 4, K, and 7. I tell you that every card has a letter on one side and a number on the other. And I give you a rule. If a card has an E on one side, then it must have a 4 on the other. Your task is to turn over the minimum number of cards necessary to see if I'm telling the truth. Which cards do you turn over? About 95% of people get this wrong. The most common answer is to turn over the E and the 4. Turning over the E is correct. If it doesn't have a 4 on the back, you've proven my rule is false. But turning over the 4 tells you nothing. My rule didn't say that a 4 must have an E on the back. You're turning it over because you're looking for confirming evidence. The other card you must turn over is the 7. Why? Because if that 7 has an E on the back, you've also proven my rule is false. To test a hypothesis, you must actively look for evidence that could disprove it. This is the principle of falsification, and it's the bedrock of the scientific method. But it goes against every instinct in our body. We read the columnists who agree with us. We watch the news channels that confirm our worldview. We have meetings with people who share our opinions because it makes us feel good to have our ideas repeated back to us. This is a disastrous way to invest. A far better approach comes from Bruce Berkowitz of Fairholme Capital. He says that instead of looking for reasons to buy a company, his team actively tries to kill it. They think of every possible thing that could go wrong: a recession, rising interest rates, terrible management, a dirty bomb going off. If they try every which way to kill their best ideas and they still can't kill them, then maybe they're onto something. This leads to another, related bias: conservatism. We're slow to change our minds, even in the face of new evidence. We anchor on our initial view and only adjust it grudgingly. You can see this clearly with stock market analysts. They're always behind the curve. They only cut their earnings forecasts after the bad news is already out, and they do it slowly. The root cause of this is often the sunk cost fallacy. We tend to hang on to our views, or our losing stocks, simply because we've already invested so much time, effort, or money into them. Imagine you're the president of an airline. You've invested $10 million in a project to build a stealth plane. When the project is 90% complete, another company comes out with a stealth plane that's faster, cheaper, and better than yours in every way. The question is, should you invest the final 10%, the last $1 million, to finish your plane? Over 80% of people say yes. They can't bear to see the initial 10 million go to waste. But now consider a slightly different scenario. You haven't invested anything yet. An employee comes to you and suggests you spend $1 million to develop a stealth plane. But you know that another company already has a superior plane on the market. Do you invest the money? This time, over 80% of people say no. The decision is logically identical. The first 10 million is a sunk cost. It's gone, and you can't get it back. The only thing that matters is the future potential of the investment. But our minds can't let go of the past. The legendary hedge fund manager Michael Steinhardt had the most extreme solution to this problem. Every so often, if he felt his portfolio had grown stale and his team was too anchored to their old ideas, he'd call up a broker and give a single instruction: sell everything. He'd liquidate the entire portfolio in an instant. He wanted to start over with a blank slate, free from the psychological baggage of past decisions. While that's too extreme for most of us, the principle is powerful. We must constantly ask ourselves, if my portfolio were 100% in cash today, would I buy these same stocks at these same prices? If the answer is no, then our past decisions are holding us hostage. All of these biases, overconfidence, confirmation bias, conservatism, are made infinitely worse by the most seductive danger of all: the siren song of stories. Our brains aren't wired for statistics. They're wired for narratives. We'll abandon cold, hard evidence in favor of a good story every single time. In a fascinating experiment, researchers staged a mock murder trial for a group of jurors. When the prosecution and defense simply presented the evidence as a list of facts, 63% of the jurors found the defendant guilty. But then they changed the format. This time, the prosecution was allowed to weave all the evidence into a compelling, coherent story. The defense could only present the facts randomly through witness testimony. The result? The number of guilty verdicts jumped to a staggering 78%. Then they flipped it. The defense told the story, and the prosecution just presented facts. This time, the guilty verdicts plummeted to just 31%. That's a nearly 50 percentage point swing based on nothing more than the power of a story. In the stock market, stories are everywhere. Value stocks, the cheap, ugly, boring companies, often have terrible stories. People don't want to own them. Growth stocks, on the other hand, especially initial public offerings, come with amazing stories. They're about the future, about innovation, about changing the world. Investors can't get enough of them. The story of an online gaming company's IPO was so compelling, it was 14 times oversubscribed. But the company missed its earnings report just 6 months later, and the stock price was cut in half. Sadly, this is the norm. The data is unequivocal. On average, IPOs are terrible long-term investments. They underperform the market by an average of 21% per year in the 3 years after they go public. Why? Because investors get so caught up in the story that they massively overpay for the hope of future growth, a hope that rarely materializes. As Ben Graham warned, the most dangerous thing an investor can do is capitalize entirely on conjectural future prospects. In other words, paying for a story. The only defense against the siren song of stories is to chain yourself to the mast of facts. As Sergeant Joe Friday used to say on the old TV show Dragnet, "Just the facts, ma'am." We must focus on the cold, hard numbers: valuation, balance sheets, capital discipline. Facts are emotionally cold, and they're the language of the C system, the language of Spock. This brings us to one of the most visible and destructive results of all these biases coming together: market bubbles. From the Dutch tulip mania in the 1630s to the South Sea bubble of the 1700s, from the dot-com bubble of the late 90s to the housing and credit bubble of the 2000s, history is a graveyard of financial manias. Standard financial theory says these things shouldn't happen. In an efficient market, rational arbitrageurs should step in and correct any mispricing. The reality is that bubbles aren't rare black swan events. They're a regular and predictable feature of financial markets. One study found over 30 bubbles since 1925, That's more than 1 every 3 years. And every single one of them burst. Bubbles are a byproduct of human behavior. Though the details change, this time it's technology, next time it's real estate, the underlying psychological pattern is always the same. There are 5 classic phases. It starts with a displacement, a genuine piece of good news, like a new technology or a change in regulations that creates new profit opportunities. This kicks off a boom. Then comes credit creation. Just as a fire needs oxygen, a boom needs cheap and easy money to grow. This leads to euphoria. Prices start to rise, and people start to believe they can only go up. Traditional valuation methods are dismissed as outdated. New metrics are invented to justify the insane prices. The 4 most dangerous words in investing, "This time is different," are heard everywhere. This is followed by the critical stage, or financial distress. Insiders start to cash out. The excess leverage built up during the boom becomes a major problem, and fraud often starts to emerge. Finally comes the revulsion. The bubble bursts, and investors are so scarred by their losses that they can no longer bring themselves to participate in the market at all. This is when assets become dirt cheap, but no one has the courage to buy them. Why don't we see these predictable patterns? We're blinded by all the biases we've discussed: over-optimism, the illusion of control, and myopia, an overwhelming focus on the short term. The average holding period for a stock on the New York Stock Exchange today is about 6 months. In the 1950s and 60s, it was 7 or 8 years. When your time horizon is only a few months, you don't care about long-term value. You only care about what the stock will do next quarter. This short-term focus leads to a powerful bias for action. We feel like we have to be doing something all the time. A fantastic example of this comes from the world of soccer. Researchers studied 311 penalty kicks in top professional leagues. The kicks were distributed roughly equally, 1/3 to the left, 1/3 to the center, and 1/3 to the right of the goal. So what's the optimal strategy for a goalkeeper? It turns out their best chance of making a save is to simply stay in the center, but what do? In 94% of cases, they dive to the left or the right. They stay in the center only 6% of the time. When asked why, they say it feels better to be seen doing something, even if it's the wrong thing. Standing still while a goal is scored feels worse than diving and missing. Investors are the same. We feel compelled to act, to trade, to tinker with our portfolios, often just out of boredom. This urge to act becomes even more intense after we've had a period of poor performance, and this leads to the ultimate self-destructive behavior, driven by our deep-seated loss aversion. Remember that we hate losses about twice as much as we enjoy equivalent gains. This simple fact explains so much about why we fail as investors. It leads directly to the disposition effect, our tendency to sell our winners too early and hold on to our losers for too long. When a stock goes up, we feel good. Selling it locks in that gain and gives us a feeling of pride. We want to take our winnings off the table. But when a stock goes down, selling it means we have to admit we made a mistake and make that loss real. The pain is too great. So we hold on, hoping it'll come back to even, so we can sell it without feeling the pain of a loss. Terry O'Dean, the same professor who studied overconfidence, looked at this behavior directly. He found that individual investors were 1.7 times more likely to sell a winning stock than a losing stock. Was their bet on the losers bouncing back a good one? Sadly, no. The winners they sold went on to outperform the losers they held by an average of 3.4% per year. And this isn't just an individual investor problem. Professional fund managers show the exact same pattern. Loss aversion is a deeply human trait. Researchers have even found it in capuchin monkeys, who split off from our evolutionary tree 35 million years ago. This brings us to the final piece of the puzzle, and perhaps the most important. How do we synthesize all this knowledge into a workable strategy? If our brains are so deeply flawed, if we're fighting against millions of years of evolution, what hope do we have? The answer is not to try to become a different person. It's not about having more willpower or being smarter. The answer, the one thing that separates the great investors from everyone else, is process. Paul DePodesta, the baseball executive made famous in the book Moneyball, tells a story about playing blackjack in Las Vegas. He was dealt a 12, and the dealer was showing a 2. The book says you're supposed to hit, but the player next to him, an older woman, screamed, "Don't do it! You're going to take the dealer's bust card." He hit anyway, got a 10, and busted. The woman was furious. The very next hand, the same situation. He had a 12, the dealer had a 2. This time, he followed the woman's advice and stayed. The dealer flipped over her card, drew a 5, and ended up with 17, beating him. The woman just looked at him and said, "See? I told you so." In both cases, he had a bad outcome. But in the first case, he had a good process. In the second, he had a bad process. Life and investing can be broken down into a simple matrix. If you have a good process and a good outcome, that's deserved success. If you have a good process and a bad outcome, that's just a bad break. If you have a bad process and a good outcome, that's just dumb luck. And if you have a bad process and a bad outcome, that's poetic justice. We have no direct control over outcomes. They're a combination of our decisions and luck. The only thing we can control, the only thing we should focus on, is our process. A good process won't guarantee a good outcome every single time, but over the long run, it's the only path to sustainable success. Your investment process is the set of rules you create to govern your behavior. It's Sir John Templeton's pre-committed wish list. It's Bruce Berkowitz's kill the company analysis. It's having a checklist of the 3 to 5 things that truly matter. It's having the discipline to wait for the fat pitch, like the baseball legend Ted Williams, who knew he didn't have to swing at every ball, only the ones in his sweet spot. A process is what protects you from your own worst enemy. It's the fortress of logic you build around yourself to keep your emotional Dr. McCoy brain from making a mess of things. It allows your inner Spock to be in charge. Investing, as Warren Buffett says, is simple, but not easy. The simplicity lies in the principles. The difficulty lies in having the discipline and the process to follow them, especially when it's hardest to do so. As we wrap up our journey through the little book of behavioral investing, it's worth pausing to reflect on the central, powerful, and somewhat uncomfortable truth at its core. And it's this: knowledge isn't enough. You can listen to this summary, you can read James Montier's brilliant book, you can memorize every single bias we've talked about today. You can know, intellectually, that you should be greedy when others are fearful, that you should ignore stories and focus on facts, that you should have the patience of a saint. And yet, when the moment comes, when the market's screaming, when your gut's twisting, when the tyranny of the moment is upon you, all that knowledge can evaporate in an instant. The author makes a sobering point. Even in the most life-threatening situations, knowledge doesn't automatically translate into better behavior. In countries with high rates of HIV/AIDS, the vast majority of people know that using a condom can prevent transmission, and yet a significant percentage still don't use them. The gap between knowing and doing is one of the most persistent and difficult challenges of the human condition. So what's the bridge across that gap? It's the theme that's run through our entire discussion today: process. You can't promise your way to becoming a better investor. You can't rely on willpower. You must build a system, a set of codified rules, that makes it easier to do the right thing and harder to do the wrong thing. You have to design an environment for your future self, who you know will be emotional, impulsive, and irrational. So what does that look like in practice? Let me leave you with 3 simple, actionable steps you can take, starting today, to begin building your own process. First, start an investment diary. This may sound silly, but it's one of the most powerful tools you have. Before you buy any investment, write down, in simple terms, exactly why you're buying it. What are the 3 to 5 key reasons for your decision? What's your expectation? And, crucially, what evidence would cause you to change your mind and sell? This simple act does 2 things. It forces you to use your logical Spock brain before you commit capital. And it creates a real-time record that prevents the trap of hindsight bias, allowing you to honestly assess your decisions and learn from your mistakes. Second, create your own simple checklist. Inspired by the doctors in the emergency room, identify the handful of factors that truly matter to your investment philosophy. Is it valuation, the strength of the balance sheet, the quality of the management? Whatever they are, write them down and run every potential investment through that checklist, without exception. A checklist is a simple tool to fight information overload and ensure you focus on the signal, not the noise. And third, turn off the bubble vision. As we've seen, the constant stream of financial news isn't just noise. It's a fire hose of emotional triggers designed to make you act. It encourages short-term thinking and a bias for action. Your greatest advantage as an individual investor is that you don't have to play that game. You don't have a boss demanding you swing at every pitch. You can afford to be patient. So turn it off. Check your portfolio infrequently. Give yourself the space to think long-term. Remember the wisdom of Winnie the Pooh. Never underestimate the value of doing nothing. Ultimately, the journey of becoming a successful investor is a journey of self-awareness. It's about having the humility to recognize that you are, and always will be, your own worst enemy. But it's also about having the wisdom to know that with the right process, the right discipline, and a healthy dose of patience, you can build a fortress of reason that'll protect you from yourself and allow you to achieve your financial goals. It's a battle you'll have to fight every day, but it's a battle you can win. That was a summary of The Little Book of Behavioral Investing by James Montier. We've touched on the most powerful ideas today, but I have to be honest with you. A summary can only ever be a map. The real treasure is found when you make the journey yourself. The real magic happens when you read the book. When a particular story or a simple phrase lands in a way you didn't expect. This summary is your guide to decide if this book deserves your time. If anything we've discussed has sparked a light in you, I urge you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning. It's an experience that can genuinely change the way you see yourself, your decisions, and your future. The link to the book is in the description below. Also, if you've found this journey valuable, please take a moment to click that like button and subscribe to the channel. That way, you won't miss our next deep dive into another life-changing book from the Billionaire's Bookshelf. Let's keep learning and growing together.